life as formative for my character. It taught me to deal with adversity. Besides, I knew there were people worse off than me. Some of the girls I went to school with had lost their fathers during the war, while others waited endlessly for them to return from the Soviet POW camps. At the local school, I was a quiet and conscientious student. There weren't enough places, so half the students attended in the morning, the others in the afternoon. And in winter, there wasn't enough coal to heat the building, so we were completely free. My mother worked as a house cleaner, while my father salvaged bricks from the city's ruins for its reconstruction, before being employed at the courtroom in Spandau. It was in those ruins that I spent whole days with my friends, playing hide-and-seek, climbing up to the roofs of damaged houses, and, best of all, searching for buried treasure. The school was located in an imposing building, a 5-minute walk from where we lived, its white facade riddled with bullet holes. I loved going to school. Our teachers were kind and attentive. We were given chocolate and warm milk every day, and I also got to see my best friend there. Her name was Margit Muche. In the mornings, I would leave for school with my lunch in a mess tin. I don't remember ever going hungry. On the other hand, I do remember eating an awful lot of potatoes, rarely accompanied by any meat. Our meals became slightly more varied when my mother started bringing back gifts from the houses where she worked. There was a sort of lard, which we used instead of butter, and which my mother would keep cool by storing it in the space between the double-glazed windows. But the outer pane was broken, and birds sometimes flew in. I would watch, rapt, from the other end of the room as they pecked at the lard. Occasionally, for a treat, my father would buy me an ice cream. That was the only way my parents had of spoiling me. I remember women taking the train to the countryside and returning with bags over their shoulders containing eggs and vegetables. I remember the wooden soles on my shoes. I remembered the fabric that my mother would receive in exchange for coupons that were much like ration cards and that she would use to make our clothes. I remember how the women of Berlin were able to transform a too-small coat into a dress, how they made getting by into an art form. We avoided speaking about Hitler. Prior to 1945, I used to recite little poems for the Führer at my kindergarten. I lived in the ruins, but I didn't know why Berlin had been destroyed and divided into 4 occupied sectors. The world where I grew up was never explained to me beyond the simple formulation, "We lost a war, now we must work." My father was not very talkative, and my mother didn't say much either, except when she was scolding my father, which was pretty often. When I reached the age of ingratitude, at about 14, my parents grew closer again, and I became the object of their disapproval. They had neither learned nor forgotten anything from the epochal events they had sleepwalked through. They weren't Nazis, but they had voted for Hitler like everyone else, and they did not feel any responsibility for what had occurred under Nazism. When my mother and her neighbours chatted, they always ended up whining about the injustice of what had happened to them, waxing nostalgic over beloved objects they had lost amid the turmoil. There was never a word of pity or compassion for the people of other countries, least of all the Russians, whom they criticized bitterly. Berlin echoed with the roar of airplanes bringing us supplies, because it was the time of the blockade. I never asked questions, whether of others or myself. I merely walked along the path that had been prepared for me. In 1954, I was confirmed at the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Hohenzollerplatz, but I had already lost my faith. Even today, I do not believe in God. Back then, however, Providence finally came to our rescue. We moved to a bigger apartment, and at last I had my own bedroom. It is difficult to describe the joy I felt. For the first time in my life, I was going to live in a normal home with my parents. Number 9 Arweilerstrasse was a rather plain-looking building, but to my eyes it was wonderful. A home belonging just to us. And it was located in my beloved Wilmersdorf neighborhood. The apartment's windows looked out at both